The morning sun spilled golden light across the quiet streets of Maplewood, a small American town where everybody seemed to know everybody, or at least thought they did. Alicia Wilson, 32 years old, drove her black Lexus sedan down Main Street, her fingers tapping the steering wheel in rhythm with the gospel song playing softly on the radio. She was dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, her natural curls perfectly styled, a leather briefcase resting in the passenger seat. She had an important hearing that morning, a case involving allegations of racial profiling by the local police department. For Alicia, this wasn't just a job, it was a mission. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where young black men were stopped for fitting the description more times than anyone could count. Becoming a civil rights lawyer wasn't an accident. It was her answer to years of injustice she'd seen with her own eyes. But right now, she was late. The courthouse clock wouldn't wait for her. She glanced at the dashboard. 8:37 a.m. She was supposed to meet her client at 8:45. Alicia's foot pressed a little harder on the gas pedal, the engine purring as the speedometer climbed. The streets were lined with tidy brick buildings, a diner that still smelled of pancakes, a barber shop with its red and white pole spinning lazily, and a handful of early risers sipping coffee on benches. They all blended into the morning blur as she drove past, her mind already rehearsing her opening statement. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. Every hearing mattered, but this one felt heavier. The evidence was strong, the witnesses brave enough to testify. It could be a real victory for the community. And then, just as she turned onto a stretch of open road leading to the courthouse, a pair of red and blue lights exploded in her rearview mirror. Her stomach sank. She checked her speed. Yes, a bit over the limit, but nothing outrageous. Still, she knew this road. She knew the town. She knew the history. Alicia's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she guided the car to the side of the road. The music kept playing, but now it sounded far away. Through the rearview mirror, she saw a tall white police officer step out of the patrol car. His slow, deliberate walk toward her made the seconds stretch unbearably long. Alicia straightened her posture, turned off the radio, and whispered to herself, "Stay calm. Be polite. But don't let him shake you." What she didn't know yet was that this morning, this stop, was about to collide with her professional life in a way she could never have imagined. The officer's shadow grew larger in Alicia's side mirror with each step he took. She could now make out the gleam of his badge and the way his hand hovered casually, but deliberately, near his holster. Alicia rolled down her window, her face calm but her pulse quickening. Officer Markson leaned down, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting her own image back at her. His lips curled into something between a smirk and suspicion. Officer Markson, license and registration. His tone wasn't neutral. It was clipped, almost accusatory, like he'd already decided she had done something wrong beyond speeding. Alicia reached slowly into her purse, moving in deliberate, visible motions, as every black parent had taught their children to do during a police stop. Alicia, of course, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over? Markson glanced at her Lexus before answering. Officer Markson, you were going 12 over. But that's not the only reason. Nice car. It yours? The question hung in the air like smoke. She could hear the subtext in every syllable. Alicia, yes, it's mine. Registered under my name. She handed him the documents. His fingers brushed them, but instead of checking them right away, he peered into the car's interior, scanning the leather seats, the briefcase, the polished dashboard. Officer Markson, what brings you to this part of town? It was a strange question given that Maplewood was hardly a big city. Alicia chose her words carefully. Alicia, I have business at the courthouse. Markson's eyebrow lifted. Officer Markson, courthouse, huh? You a secretary? Witness? Alicia felt heat rise in her chest, but her voice stayed even. Alicia, I'm an attorney. He chuckled, not a laugh of amusement, but of disbelief. Officer Markson, an attorney. Right. Without another word, he walked to the back of her car and began circling it slowly, as if searching for something that would justify more than a speeding ticket. Alicia's eyes followed him through the mirrors, her knuckles tightening around the steering wheel. She thought about her case that morning, about how many times her clients had described moments exactly like this. She thought she was prepared for it, but experiencing it firsthand, right before walking into court to fight racial bias, felt like a cruel twist of fate. When Markson returned to her window, he had a new expression, one of feigned casualness, masking a quiet authority. "Officer Markson, step out of the vehicle, please." The request, or rather the command, dropped into her stomach like a stone. Alicia turned off the ignition, took a steady breath, and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath her heels. She could feel the stares of passing drivers as Markson began asking questions that had nothing to do with speeding, questions about where she lived, why she drove a Lexus, whether she had ever been in trouble before. Each question dripped with an unspoken accusation. "You don't belong here." She answered each one clearly, directly, refusing to show the frustration simmering under her composure. Finally, after a long, silent pause, Markson scribbled a ticket and handed it to her. "Officer Markson, drive safe, ma'am." The ma'am was laced with a tone that made it feel more like case closed than courtesy. Alicia took the ticket, offered a polite nod, and got back into her car. She didn't say another word, but as she started the engine and pulled away, one thought burned in her mind. "I'll see you again, Officer Markson, and not on the side of the road." Alicia merged back onto the road, the courthouse now only 10 minutes away. But the encounter with Officer Markson clung to her like a heavy coat she couldn't take off. Her heart was still beating too fast. She tried to refocus on her upcoming hearing, but the words from the roadside replayed in her mind. "Nice car? It yours? An attorney? Right." She knew those weren't just casual remarks. They were little probes, sharpened by assumption, the same assumptions she had fought against for years in the courtroom. The ticket sat on the passenger seat, the black ink still fresh. Her briefcase rested beside it, containing the thick file for Miller vs. Maplewood Police Department, the case she had prepared for months. It was the kind of case that could set a precedent, forcing this small-town police department to finally answer for years of racial profiling. The irony was bitter. On the very morning she was going to argue a racial bias case against the police, she had just been stopped in what felt like a textbook example of it. Alicia shook her head and pressed the gas a little harder. She had no time to dwell. She needed to arrive composed, not rattled. In court, every detail mattered. The firmness of her voice, the precision of her words, the confidence in her stance. She couldn't let a single crack show. As the courthouse came into view, an old red brick building with a white clock tower, she glanced at the time, 8:54 a.m. She was late, but not disastrously so. She parked quickly, gathered her files, and walked toward the grand wooden doors. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of polished oak and paper. The hallways echoed with the footsteps of lawyers, clerks, and defendants, shuffling toward their assigned courtrooms. Alicia moved with purpose, heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. When she reached courtroom 2B, her client, David Miller, was already seated at the defense table, looking nervous but determined. She gave him a reassuring nod. Across the room, the plaintiff's table was still empty. The judge's bench loomed at the far end, an American flag hanging behind it, its fabric swaying slightly in the draft from the air vents. The bailiff called for the parties to take their places. Alicia opened her briefcase and laid out her notes. She was ready. Then, the door to the courtroom swung open. Heavy, measured footsteps echoed as a uniformed figure entered. Alicia's eyes lifted, and her breath caught for just a moment. It was Officer Markson. Same sunglasses, same rigid posture, same face from less than an hour ago. Only now, instead of standing on the side of the road, he was walking toward the witness stand. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed across his features, and with it, a flicker of discomfort. Alicia's lips curved into the faintest, most controlled smile. "Good morning, officer," she thought silently. "Let's see how this plays out." The courtroom murmurs quieted as Officer Markson strode toward the witness stand, his polished boots clicking against the hardwood floor. He removed his sunglasses, tucking them into his breast pocket, and adjusted the crease of his uniform as though the room itself were a mirror. The bailiff stepped forward, Bible in hand. Bailiff. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God? Markson's voice was steady. Officer Markson, I do. He took his seat, back straight, jaw tight. Alicia, standing at her table, watched him with the calm focus of a chess player studying her opponent's next move. She'd argued against dozens of officers before, but never one who had just personally given her a crash course in the very prejudice she was here to expose. The opposing attorney, a tall man in a gray suit named Richard Hayes, approached the stand first. Hayes began his direct examination, guiding Markson through the events that had led to this lawsuit. A traffic stop 2 years ago in which David Miller, a black man, had been pulled over without clear cause and later arrested on vague charges that were dismissed. Markson spoke in polished, rehearsed sentences. Standard procedure, officer safety, reasonable suspicion. His voice was flat, professional, free of hesitation. But Alicia saw it. The faint twitch at the corner of his mouth when certain questions landed. The subtle pause before he used words like suspect and non-compliant. When Hayes was done, he gave a polite nod. Richard Hayes, your witness, Ms. Wilson. Alicia rose slowly, deliberately. She straightened the lapels of her navy blazer and approached the stand, her heels tapping in perfect rhythm. Alicia, good morning, Officer Markson. He gave a short nod. Officer Markson, morning. Alicia, we've met before, haven't we? A ripple of curiosity moved through the spectators. Markson's eyes flickered, the first crack in his calm. Officer Markson, I don't believe so. Alicia, no? You don't remember stopping me this morning on Elm Street? Black Lexus sedan, navy suit, on my way here. The room went still. Even the judge's eyes lifted from her notes. Markson shifted in his chair. Officer Markson, yes, I remember. Alicia, and during that stop, you asked me if my car was mine. Do you typically ask that question during a routine speeding stop? Hayes rose. Richard Hayes, objection, relevance. Judge, overruled. Answer the question. Markson's jaw tightened. Officer Markson, depends on the situation. Alicia, and in my situation, what was it about me that made you doubt I owned my car? The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Markson's eyes darted briefly toward Hayes, then back to Alicia. He didn't answer. Alicia allowed the pause to linger, letting the jury absorb the discomfort. Then she pivoted, her voice still even, but now razor sharp. Alicia, officer, you testified earlier that Mr. Miller was pulled over for a minor traffic violation. Isn't it true that no citation was actually issued that day? Markson hesitated. Officer Markson, yes. Alicia, and isn't it also true that the initial reason you gave for stopping him was later changed in your written report? Markson swallowed. Officer Markson, yes. Piece by piece, her questions began to pull at the threads of his testimony. The same subtle assumptions, the same shifting explanations he had shown her that morning, were now laid bare for the jury to see. By the time Alicia returned to her table, the once confident officer looked smaller in the witness chair. And for the first time since stepping into the courtroom, Alicia allowed herself a private thought. This morning's stop wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a gift. Alicia remained standing at the defense table, a quiet authority radiating from her posture. She let the silence after her last question linger, making sure the jury felt the weight of Markson's hesitant yes. Then she stepped forward again, notes in hand but eyes locked firmly on him. Alicia, Officer Markson, you've worked for the Maplewood Police Department for how many years? Officer Markson, 12. Alicia, in those 12 years, have you ever attended a bias awareness or cultural sensitivity training? Officer Markson, yes. We're required to. Alicia, and what is the purpose of such training? Officer Markson, to ensure fairness, to avoid making assumptions about people. Alicia, exactly. And yet, this morning, just hours ago, you made an assumption about me. You implied my car might not be mine. You asked me questions unrelated to the stop. Would you agree? Markson's shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly. Officer Markson, I was, making conversation. Alicia tilted her head slightly, the faintest smile touching her lips. Alicia, conversation? Or fishing for reasons to escalate a stop? A low murmur rolled through the courtroom. Hayes rose again. Richard Hayes, objection, argumentative. Judge, overruled. The witness will answer. Markson's voice was flatter now. Officer Markson, I was doing my job. Alicia, your job. Let's talk about that. On the day you stopped Mr. Miller, you claimed his taillight was broken. True? Officer Markson, yes. Alicia, do you have photographic evidence of that broken taillight? Officer Markson, no. Alicia, did you issue a fix-it ticket or any written notice about the supposed defect? Officer Markson, no. Alicia, so the only proof that his taillight was broken is your word? Officer Markson, yes. Alicia took 2 measured steps closer to the jury box, turning slightly so they could see her face as she spoke. Alicia, ladies and gentlemen, we're being asked to trust the same word that, just this morning, questioned whether I, an attorney walking into this courthouse, could possibly own my own car. The same instincts that guided that assumption guided the stop of my client. She let her words hang in the air before continuing. Alicia, and Officer Markson, in your 12 years, how many drivers have you pulled over for minor equipment issues? Officer Markson, hundreds. Alicia, how many of those drivers were black? Hayes was on his feet again. Richard Hayes, objection. No foundation. Alicia, Your Honor, I have the department's own traffic stop data entered into evidence. Plaintiff's Exhibit 14. The judge nodded. Judge, overruled. Answer the question. Markson exhaled. Officer Markson, I don't know. Alicia lifted a document from her table. Alicia, allow me to help you remember. According to your department's records, in the past 3 years, 72% of your stops for minor equipment issues involved black drivers, in a town that's less than 20% black. Markson's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. Alicia's voice softened, but every word was deliberate. Alicia, this isn't about one bad day, Officer Markson. It's about a pattern that hurts people, humiliates them, and erodes the trust between the police and the community they're supposed to protect. She stepped back toward her table, her heels clicking with finality. Alicia, no further questions. The courtroom was silent except for the faint scratching of a juror's pen. The weight of her cross-examination settled over the room like a thick, undeniable truth. Markson sat a little lower in the witness chair, no longer the confident officer who had walked in minutes earlier. And Alicia, calm, collected, and unshaken, knew the tide had shifted in her client's favor. The judge called for a short recess, and as the jurors filed out, Alicia sat quietly at her table, sipping water. She didn't gloat, didn't exchange a smile with her client. Outwardly, she was composed, but inside, she could feel the shift. When the jurors returned, the courtroom seemed different. The air was heavier, the tension sharper. Officer Markson remained in the witness chair, his uniform crisp but his posture slightly slouched, as though the weight of the last hour had finally started to press down. Alicia rose again for her redirect. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was a subtle edge, like a scalpel, that cuts clean without tearing. Alicia, Officer Markson, during your testimony earlier, you said you were just doing your job. Would you agree that your job requires you to treat all citizens equally under the law? Officer Markson, yes. Alicia, regardless of their race, background, or what kind of car they drive. Officer Markson, yes. Alicia, then let's go back to the stop you made on Mr. Miller. You claimed his taillight was broken, with no evidence, no photo, no citation. And today, you've admitted that you asked me, a black woman, if I owned my own car during a routine speeding stop? Do you understand how those actions might be perceived? Markson hesitated, glancing toward his attorney, but Alicia held his gaze. Officer Markson. Yes, Alicia. Perceived as what? A muscle in his jaw twitched. Officer Markson. As biased. The words seemed to echo in the room. Alicia didn't move, didn't even blink. She let the admission hang in the air long enough for every juror to hear it twice in their minds. Alicia. Bias, conscious or unconscious, can lead to unfair treatment, correct? Officer Markson. Yes. Alicia. An unfair treatment by police can damage the community's trust in law enforcement, correct? Officer Markson. Yes. Alicia turned to the jury, her voice low but steady, drawing them into her words. Alicia. Mr. Miller wasn't pulled over because of a broken taillight. He was pulled over because of who he was. And I know that, because this morning I was too. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth, laid out with such precision, carried its own power. Markson's eyes fell to the desk in front of him. Hayes shifted uncomfortably at the plaintiff's table, flipping through his papers as though the right page could undo what had just been said. Alicia. No further questions, Your Honor. As Alicia returned to her seat, she could sense it. The jury leaning slightly toward her side, the quiet nods from a few spectators, even the judge's lingering glance in her direction. The case wasn't over yet, but the foundation had cracked wide open, and Alicia knew exactly how to bring it down in the closing arguments. The final day of the trial began under a pale morning sky, the kind where the sun seemed hesitant to break through the clouds. Inside courtroom 2B, however, the atmosphere was electric. The jury filed in, faces composed but carrying the gravity of the decision they'd soon announce. Alicia sat beside David Miller, her client, who clutched his hands together tightly. She gave him a calm nod, steady, reassuring. Before the verdict, each side was allowed closing arguments. Hayes went first, his voice smooth, rehearsed. He spoke of procedures and good faith actions by Officer Markson, urging the jury not to punish a man who was just doing his job. When he finished, Alicia rose. She didn't rush to the center of the room. She walked slowly, each step deliberate. She stood before the jury, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the podium. Alicia. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about more than a traffic stop. It's about trust. Trust between the people and those sworn to protect them. When that trust is broken, justice demands we acknowledge it. Her voice was low but steady, pulling the jury in. Alicia, you've heard the facts. No broken taillight, no citation, just assumptions. Assumptions that my client was suspicious because of the color of his skin, and those same instincts greeted me this very morning, on my way to this courthouse. She let the words hang in the air, then took a step closer. Alicia, bias doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It hides in the questions we ask, in the doubt we give to some, but not others. But make no mistake, those whispers can be just as damaging as the loudest act of injustice. Alicia turned slightly, her eyes briefly meeting Markson's before she addressed the jury again. Alicia, this isn't about vengeance. It's about accountability, about making sure that what happened to David Miller and to countless others whose stories never reached this courtroom is no longer accepted as just the way things are. You have the power to say it stops here. She paused, letting the silence work for her. Alicia, we ask you to find in favor of Mr. Miller. With that, she returned to her seat. David's eyes glistened with quiet gratitude. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood, a single sheet of paper in hand. Foreperson. In the matter of Miller versus the Maplewood Police Department, we find in favor of the plaintiff. David exhaled sharply, a sound somewhere between relief and disbelief. Alicia placed a steady hand on his shoulder. The verdict included damages and a mandate for the department to undergo comprehensive bias training. As the judge thanked the jury and adjourned court, Alicia gathered her files. She caught sight of Markson across the room. He didn't look defiant anymore, just thoughtful, maybe even chastened. Outside, the late afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, but Alicia and David walked past them, down into the street, where the city noise felt alive and full of possibility. David turned to her. David, you think this'll change anything? Alicia looked ahead, a small, knowing smile forming. Alicia, it's a start. And together they stepped forward, into the sunlight, into the crowd, into a future where hope felt just a little more possible.